Don't just read it. Do something with it. Activate on it.
So welcome back to Cracking the Code, where we break down the ideas, trends, and strategies that help contractors run stronger, smarter businesses. Today's episode is all about understanding what's really happening in the HVAC contractor market right now, not based on guesswork, but based on real, actionable data. Every year, the HVAC Contractor Survey gives us a clear snapshot of what contractors across North America are experiencing, what they're thinking, and what they're prioritizing. And joining me today is someone who helps bring this data to life. I'm joined today by Julie Trujillo from Decision Analyst, the research partner behind the 2026 HVAC Contractor Survey. Julie, you and your team have a unique perspective because you're not just collecting data, you're actually interpreting what it actually means for the industry. So today we're going to talk about what stood out in this year's results, what's changing, what's not, and what contractors, distributors, and manufacturers should be paying attention to as we move through 2026 and get into 2027. So Julie, welcome back to Cracking the Code. She's back.
And thanks for having me, Dave.
You bet. So let's start here for context. For those who may not be familiar with the survey, give us kind of the big picture. What is the 2026 HVAC Contractor Survey, and why does this kind of research matter for the industry?
Absolutely. And yes, truly, thanks for having me here. It means a lot to get to spend some time talking about this survey. So at a high level, the HVAC Contractor Survey is designed to give the industry a fact-based understanding of contractor behavior, challenges, and priorities. So not just, what do we think? What are our opinions? It's really data-driven. So we're talking about a broad mix of contractors from across the U.S. and Canada. We've got different company sizes, from smaller owner-operators to larger, much more structured organizations. And then there's a range of roles. So we have owners, managers, and then some of their team members as well. And what makes this important is it moves the conversation from what we think is happening to what contractors are actually experiencing. And that's critical because the industry is evolving quickly. There's a lot of assumptions being made, and decisions are often based on limited visibility. So this kind of data helps. It gives contractors benchmarks for themselves, distributors too, some better information to understand their customers, and then manufacturers can align their strategies with real-world conditions. So it really becomes a shared lens for the entire HVAC channel.
Man, that was a mouthful. You had that all planned out pretty good. You've done this before,
Yeah,
Julie, haven't you?
great.
So that's great context. And it really sets the stage for why this matters. So thinking about that, let's get into the findings. So let's talk about kind of the biggest headlines. When you reviewed the 2026 results, what were some of the biggest headlines or most interesting themes that really jumped out to you right away?
Yeah, well, there were definitely some things that stood out almost immediately. So first, there's still a significant gap between high-performing contractors and everyone else. So you've got a smaller group that's very process-driven. They're focused on pricing, systems, and structured selling. And then a much larger group that's still operating more reactively. And then second, we're seeing continued pressure around labor, time, and overall operational stress. So even as demand remains relatively strong, many contractors are saying, hey, we're busy, but it doesn't feel any easier. And third, one of the more interesting findings is around how contractors approach sales and pricing. There's still a large percentage of contractors who don't consistently present options, they don't fully leverage financing, and are leaving an opportunity on the table. So while the market's active, the execution varies widely.
Yeah, and I see that all the time in coaching as well. Was there anything that really surprised you guys this year?
Well, what stood out to me was how consistent some of these patterns are. Even with all the education, the tools, the technology that's available, behavior change is still slow. Adoption of best practices is really uneven. So at the same time, the contractors who are adopting those practices are seeing better margins, higher close rates, and more stability overall. So the gap's becoming more visible.
Yeah, and that's really, really interesting. And again, stuff we see in coaching all the time, especially the idea that the gap is widening. So let's talk about the human side of this. Let's talk about kind of the contractor mindset. What do these results tell us about the current mindset of HVAC contractors in 2026? Are they feeling optimistic, cautious, pressured? What's the overall tone?
Yeah, it's definitely a mix. So there's still optimism because the demand is there, the opportunities are there, but there's also a strong sense of kind of pressure and fatigue. A lot of contractors are saying, we're working harder than ever. We're busy, but not always as profitable as we should be. Some of the biggest concerns we're seeing, finding and keeping good people, managing cash flow.
That hasn't changed since I was a contractor. Finding and keeping good people is the common theme year after
Yeah,
year.
I think that HVAC is probably not the only industry that's experiencing that as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, along with that, it's managing the cash flow, keeping up with rising costs. That just keeps becoming more and more of a pressure point. And then just the complexity of running the business. So, the mindset is opportunity paired with some stress. And that's where the need for better systems and structures really shows up.
I actually created a sales training program called Stress Free HVAC Sales because you know what? I've been there, done that, and this can be a stressful business if you don't have the processes. In fact, I learned that the more processes I put in place, the less stress I had in my business. And so I'm a big believer. So, where do contractors seem to see their biggest opportunities right now?
So the opportunity is really in execution. It's not necessarily more leads or more demand. It's doing a better job with the opportunities they already have. And that includes, like we mentioned earlier, presenting options, using financing effectively, pricing with confidence, and then creating a better customer experience. The contractors who focus there are the ones really pulling ahead.
Yeah, so that customer experience has become kind of the main thing that people are focusing on in the industry. The ones that are really, kind of transitioning from that reactive approach that you talked about earlier and being more proactive. They're really focusing on making sure that you, as the customer, Julie, are experiencing something as a little bit less stressful, number one, but also just a more pleasurable interaction, if there is such a thing, with an HVAC contractor. So that's really a powerful takeaway. It's not always about more, it really is about better. So let's talk about the differences across the market. So, were there any meaningful kind of differences based on company size, role, experience, or geography that stood out?
Yeah, and this is where it really gets interesting. So, one of the clearest differences is based on company size and structure. So, smaller contractors tend to be more hands on, they have less formal systems, and they often rely heavily on the owner for the key decisions. Larger, more developed companies are more likely to have defined processes, dedicated roles within the organization, and clearer financial visibility. And we also saw some differences in experience level. Newer contractors often struggle more with pricing and structure. And then role perspective. So owners versus managers don't always see the business in the same way.
Oh,
And then
imagine that.
imagine that, right? And then geographically, so while there are some differences, the core challenges are surprisingly consistent across regions.
Yeah, and you think about that. We paid a little extra special attention this year to differences between the U.S. and Canada. So looking across the border, what you guys see there?
There are some variations, but overall, the core issues that labor, pricing, operations, they're very similar. And then the biggest differences tend to show up in some of the market conditions, the regulatory environments, and sometimes adoption of certain practices. But fundamentally, contractors on both sides of the border are dealing with many of the same challenges.
Yeah, and that's You never know till you look at it, but that's kind of what we expected because I've done training in US and Canada. And when you really look at it, we're dealing with the same kinds of issues. Yeah, we've got some different, um, maybe some different political kind of things, some different governmental kind of things, and all that. But it really is a the industry is not that different from different places, different places around the country. So, Julie, based on everything you've seen in the 2026 survey, what should contractors, distributors, and manufacturers be paying closer attention to right now?
Well, I'd put it into three areas. So, first, don't ignore the fundamentals. The basics still matter. I don't see that changing anytime soon. Really dial in on pricing, process, training, and the financial visibility aspects. Second, focus on behavior, not just your tools. So, a lot of contractors have access to great platforms, great training, all these great resources, but the results come from consistent execution. And third, pay attention to the gaps. The biggest opportunity in this industry right now is closing the gap between average and high performance. For distributors and manufacturers, that means supporting contractors beyond just the products and then helping them improve how they run their businesses. And for contractors, it means being willing to step back, evaluate how you're operating, and then make changes where you need to.
We just finished up a raising goats program out in Phoenix, and the four principles for raising goats. One of the principles is all about execution. We call it, it's all about implementation and operation, right? So those are all execution related words. And to a person in the meeting, they're saying that's our biggest challenge is getting everyone on the same sheet of paper, doing the same stuff on a consistent basis. And that's also what drives the customer experience, right? If you've got technician A does a great job, technician B does an okay job, technician C does a not so good job. If they showed up at your house, Julie, technician A would own you. You just say, I just don't. If you can't send A, don't send anybody, right? If you've experienced B and C, so being consistent, critically important. So, what's one thing that you think people tend to overlook in data like this? I mean, you do this all the time. So, what do people overlook?
Right. So it's not just information, it's direction. So the goal isn't just to read the data and say, oh, that's nice. It's to ask yourself, what does this mean for how I run my business tomorrow? And the contractors who do that are the ones who will benefit the most.
Yeah, that's so true. Because just looking at the pretty pictures and the words and the graphs and the charts, I mean, that's not any good. It's like, what do we do with this, right? So when you look at all of this together, what gives you the most confidence about the future of the HVAC industry?
It's the willingness to improve. Even with all the challenges we see, contractors investing in learning, looking for better ways to operate, trying to build stronger businesses. That mindset is what drives progress.
Man, I think you just hit this out of the ballpark, Julie. Thank you for being with us and helping bring these survey results to life. And I know you didn't do it by yourself. So
Definitely not.
let's give a shout out to the rest of the folks on your team that were involved in this thing. Who was involved in making this work for you?
There's always Felicia Rogers, my EVP. She is integral to all the work that we do here at Decision Analyst. And you may remember Hillary Simmelman. She was with me out at Epic. She has been a great resource, as well as we read into not just what the contractors are saying, but giving us some of that homeowner perspective as well. So it's always a team over here at Decision Analyst working hard.
So, Julie, thank you again. And what I always appreciate about conversations like this is that they help us move beyond assumptions and really understand what's happening in the field. So the 2026 HVAC Contractor Survey is more than just data. It's a snapshot of an industry that's evolving, it's adapting, and it's full of opportunities. So for contractors, distributors, and manufacturers, the real value is taking these insights and turning them into better decisions. Thanks again, Julie, for joining us on Cracking the Code. And to everyone watching or listening, thanks for being with us. If you found this helpful, be sure to like, subscribe, and share this episode with someone else in the industry who wants to stay ahead of what's changing. We'll see you next time on Cracking the Code.